In a luxurious mansion on the outskirts of Lagos, Femi, a successful billionaire businessman, sat in his grand office overlooking the sprawling city. His sharp suit and confident smile reflected years of hard work and ambition. He had it all: wealth, fame, and a beautiful wife named Bliss. But no one truly knew what was happening behind the closed doors of his perfect life. Bliss, his wife of 7 years, was a kind-hearted woman who had supported Femi through thick and thin. She had always been his rock, never asking for anything in return. She wasn't as slim and glamorous as the women Femi admired in the media, but she carried herself with grace. Over the years, Bliss had gained some weight. It wasn't just because of her love for food. She had struggled with her health, and it had taken a toll on her body. Despite all her love and sacrifices for Femi, the relationship was starting to feel different. Femi had changed. He'd become distant and often criticized Bliss for her appearance. He would mock her, calling her fat and lazy, and telling her she needed to lose weight if she wanted to keep up with him. He had become so obsessed with his appearance, always surrounded by models and actresses, that Bliss had become nothing more than a shadow in his eyes. It hurt her deeply, but she never let it show. She loved Femi with all her heart and wanted to make him proud. She tried dieting and exercising, but it wasn't enough. Femi's cruel words still echoed in her mind. "You're embarrassing me," he'd said once at a lavish party when she was wearing a beautiful dress that hugged her curves. His words stung more than the cold champagne that had spilled on her dress. One evening, Femi had invited his friends over for a private gathering. He had insisted that Bliss join them, even though she was feeling unwell. When she arrived in the living room, Femi's friends, Torbo and Olu, were sitting on the couch, sipping their drinks. The moment Femi looked at Bliss, he raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Is this your idea of getting healthy?" he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look at you, still struggling with that weight of yours." Bliss could feel the heat rise in her cheeks as the room fell silent. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away, refusing to let anyone see her pain. Femi's words didn't just hurt her. They humiliated her in front of people she had known for years. Torbo and Olu chuckled, not saying a word to defend her. Bliss excused herself from the room and locked herself in their bedroom, her heart aching. Femi never noticed her pain. All he cared about was his image. He had forgotten the person who had loved him before the fame and fortune. Bliss knew she needed to change, but she didn't want to do it for Femi anymore. She wanted to do it for herself. Over the next few months, Bliss began to focus on herself. She joined a fitness program not to please Femi, but to regain her confidence. She worked out every morning, meditated, and practiced mindfulness. Slowly but surely, her body began to transform, but something even more significant was happening within her. She was learning to love herself again. Femi, however, remained oblivious to the changes. He continued to mock Bliss in private and flaunted his perfect life with his colleagues. He was always away on business trips, leaving Bliss to handle the house and everything else on her own. She had become a mere accessory in his life, something to be seen and not heard. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. One day, Femi walked into their bedroom to find Bliss standing in front of the mirror, admiring her new physique. Her face was glowing, her body more toned and healthy than ever. She turned to Femi and gave him a smile that was filled with confidence and strength. "Well, look at you," Femi said with a grin. "I guess those workout sessions are finally paying off. You don't look half as bad as before." Bliss didn't respond. She simply kept looking at herself in the mirror, admiring how far she had come. She was stronger than ever, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Femi thought this was his chance to make another snide remark, but this time he was about to receive a lesson that would change his life forever. Bliss turned to face him, her eyes filled with calm determination. "You know, Femi," she began softly, "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything you've said to me, the jokes, the insults, all the ways you made me feel small and unworthy. You never saw me for who I truly am. You never saw my heart, my love for you, or the woman behind the weight. You only saw what you wanted to see." Femi blinked, surprised by her sudden change in demeanor. He had never seen her like this before, but he wasn't worried yet. He thought it was just another moment of weakness, another one of her emotional outbursts. "You know what, Femi?" Bliss continued, her voice now firm. "I'm not going to take it anymore. I've worked hard to become a better version of myself, but not for you. I did it for me, and you might not realize it yet, but I'm about to show you just how much I've changed." Femi chuckled. "What do you mean, Bliss? What could you possibly do that would make me regret anything?" Bliss smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Just wait and see." And with that, she turned away from him and walked out of the room, leaving Femi standing there in confusion. He didn't understand what was going on. What could she possibly do to make him regret the way he had treated her? As Femi stood there, thinking, he had no idea that the very thing he had mocked and belittled her for was the key to a change he could never have anticipated. But Bliss was no longer the woman he had once put down. She was stronger, wiser, and she had learned the value of self-respect. And soon, Femi would be the one regretting the way he had treated her. Days passed after that moment. Bliss had left Femi in that state of confusion. But the truth was, she didn't need to explain herself anymore. For so long, she had tried to please him, to be the wife he wanted. She had worn herself thin trying to gain his approval. But in the end, it was clear that no matter how hard she tried, he would never see her the way she deserved to be seen. And maybe that was a blessing in disguise. Bliss woke up early every morning. Her new routine was refreshing. Instead of dreading the day ahead, she was excited to face it. She had enrolled in a self-care program and had started attending classes for women who wanted to empower themselves. She learned about mental health, fitness, and even self-love practices. And as she spent time focusing on herself, the emotional weight she had carried for so long began to lift. Meanwhile, Femi's life had remained unchanged. He spent his days locked in his office, closing business deals, attending events, and mingling with the people who admired him for his wealth and influence. But he began to notice something strange. Bliss was no longer the quiet, submissive woman he could control. She was different now. She carried herself with a kind of grace and confidence that he had never seen before. At first, Femi thought it was just a phase. Perhaps she had finally figured out how to lose some weight, and now she felt good about herself. But as the days passed, he began to see something more. Bliss wasn't just physically different. Her attitude had changed. There was a certain spark in her eyes whenever she spoke, a quiet strength that made her stand tall in any room she walked into. Femi couldn't quite place it, but he didn't like it. One evening, after another long day at work, Femi returned home to find Bliss sitting in the living room, reading a book. She looked up as he entered, her smile calm, but distant. "How was your day?" she asked, as if nothing had changed between them. Femi hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had always been the one to lead their conversations, but now he felt like a stranger in his own house. "It was fine," he muttered, but the words felt empty. Bliss didn't say anything more. She simply went back to her book, her focus unbroken, as if she was too engrossed in her own world to care about his empty responses. Femi felt a twinge of irritation. Why wasn't she trying to make small talk? Why wasn't she asking about his day as she used to? He was used to being the center of attention. But now, it was as if Bliss didn't even need him. She was no longer the needy, insecure woman he had known. As days turned into weeks, Femi began to feel a shift in their relationship. Bliss was becoming more distant, and while he noticed her transformation, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it. His pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he became more frustrated and angry, trying to control the one thing he thought he could still control, her. But Bliss was no longer a woman who would let anyone control her. She had finally realized that her worth wasn't tied to anyone's approval, least of all Femi's. One day, Femi decided to confront her. He had to find out what was going on in her mind, to regain the control he had lost. He walked into their bedroom, where Bliss was getting ready for an event. He stood by the door, watching her as she applied makeup with precision. "Bliss," Femi said, his tone sharp, We need to talk. Bliss glanced at him briefly before turning back to the mirror. About what? He was taken aback by her indifference. She didn't even seem interested in what he had to say. About you. What's going on with you? You've changed. You've stopped caring about us. Bliss let out a small sigh, putting down her brush and turning to face him. I haven't changed, Femi. I'm just finally being true to myself. For once, I'm not living for you. I'm living for me. Femi blinked in confusion. What do you mean? You're still my wife. We're still together, aren't we? Bliss smiled softly, but there was no warmth in it. We're still together, but we're not the same, Femi. I'm not the woman you used to ridicule and belittle. I've learned to respect myself, and I won't allow you or anyone else to tear me down again. Femi's jaw tightened. You think you're better than me now, don't you? Bliss didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. She had already said what she needed to say. No, Femi. I don't think I'm better than you. But I know that I'm better than the way you treated me. The silence that followed was heavy. Femi could feel the weight of her words sinking in, and for the first time he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it, not yet. I don't need you to tell me who I am, Femi snapped, his voice rising. I built this life, this empire, and you're nothing without me. Bliss didn't flinch. I never needed you to build anything for me. I had myself long before you came into my life. I loved you for who you were, not for your money or your success. But you've forgotten that. You've forgotten me. With that, Bliss turned and walked out of the room, leaving Femi standing there, his anger bubbling to the surface. He had always thought he had the upper hand, but now it seemed like the tables had turned. Bliss had changed, but Femi was too blinded by his own arrogance to see that the change wasn't just physical. It was mental and emotional. Bliss was finally finding herself, and she was no longer willing to tolerate the man who had mocked and belittled her. But Femi wasn't done yet. He would try to win back control. After all, he couldn't let his wife think she could live without him. The battle was just beginning. And Bliss? She was no longer waiting for a man who couldn't see her worth. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew. Femi tried to pretend like everything was fine, but he could feel the distance growing between him and Bliss with every passing day. No matter how many expensive gifts he bought her or how many lavish trips he promised, Bliss was no longer interested in the material things that once kept her attention. She had begun to rediscover her own worth, and it was something Femi could no longer control with his money or his words. Bliss had started attending business meetings, networking events, and even taking on a few entrepreneurial ventures of her own. She wasn't the helpless, overweight woman that Femi had mocked and belittled for so long. She was a force to be reckoned with. Bliss had started her own fitness and wellness business, focusing on helping women regain their confidence, both inside and out. She knew how to empower others because she had been through the struggle herself. Femi couldn't understand it. He watched from the sidelines as his wife flourished in ways he had never expected. He had always seen her as someone who needed him, someone who was too dependent on his success. But now he could see that Bliss didn't need him at all. It made him feel small, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. One day, as Femi was preparing for a high-profile gala, he received a call that sent a chill down his spine. It was from his lawyer. Femi, we need to talk about the divorce papers, the lawyer said. Bliss has filed for separation. She's serious about this. Femi stood frozen, his heart pounding. He had heard rumors about couples splitting up after years of marriage, but he never thought it would happen to him. Not with Bliss. They had been through so much together. Wasn't that enough? His first instinct was to fight it. He couldn't let her walk away from him. But then, he realized that this wasn't just about the marriage. It was about his own ego, his pride. He had always thought that money could solve everything, that his wealth and status would be enough to keep anyone by his side. But Bliss was different. She wasn't swayed by his money or his success. She wanted something more, something real. Femi's thoughts were interrupted when he heard Bliss's voice from the hallway. She had just returned from another one of her business meetings, her face glowing with excitement. She didn't notice Femi standing in the living room, staring out of the window. Femi took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "Bliss," he called out, his voice sounding strained. Bliss looked up, surprised to see him standing there. "Yes?" she asked, her tone neutral but not cold. "I got a call from my lawyer today," Femi began, his words feeling foreign to him. "He said you filed for divorce. Is that true?" Bliss's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. A mixture of sadness and relief. She had been thinking about this moment for a long time, but hearing Femi say the words out loud made it all the more real. "Yes," she said simply. "It's true. I've thought about it for a while, Femi. I don't think we can keep going like this. You've hurt me for too long, and I've tried to make things work, but I can't keep living in your shadow. I've found my own voice now, and I'm not going to let anyone silence me. Not even you." Femi's chest tightened as he struggled to find the right words. His mind raced, but no matter what he said, he couldn't undo the damage he had caused. He had taken Bliss for granted, and now he was losing her. He had pushed her too far, and the reality of it was hitting him hard. "Bliss, I didn't mean for it to come to this," he said, his voice cracking. "I've made mistakes. I know I have, but I love you. I want to fix this." Bliss shook her head, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "Femi, love isn't enough. You've been cruel to me for too long. You've made me feel worthless, like I didn't matter. You mocked me when I needed support the most. I can't forgive that. I've spent too many years trying to live up to your expectations, and now I'm finally living for myself." Femi felt a pang of guilt, but it was too late. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had lost her, and in that moment, Femi knew that he had no one to blame but himself. "I don't know what to do," Femi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." Bliss looked at him one last time, her gaze unwavering. "You can't fix it, Femi. You've had your chance. I need to move on. And so do you." With those words, Bliss turned and walked away, leaving Femi standing in the middle of the room. He watched her go, his heart sinking with each step she took. He had never felt so alone. The woman he had once taken for granted was now walking away from him, and he had no idea how to get her back. As the days passed, Femi tried to make amends. He threw money at the situation, buying her gifts, offering her extravagant vacations, but nothing worked. Bliss wasn't interested in his money anymore. She had found something far more valuable, her independence. Femi's life was slowly falling apart. He had lost his wife, his best friend, and his partner. His empire was starting to crumble, too, as people began to see the cracks in his perfect image. He was no longer the powerful billionaire everyone admired. He was a man who had pushed the one person who truly mattered away. But Bliss? She was thriving. She was building her business, growing in ways Femi had never imagined. She had found her true purpose, and nothing could stop her now. And Femi? He was left wondering if he would ever find redemption. Femi's world seemed to be crumbling faster than he could keep up. Bliss's absence felt like a constant weight on his shoulders. Every corner of the mansion reminded him of what he had lost. The empty spaces where her laughter used to echo, the quiet mornings when she would bring him coffee with a smile. He no longer felt the rush of power that once came with his wealth and influence. Instead, he was consumed by regret and a deep sense of loneliness that no amount of money or status could fix. Days blurred together as Femi tried to salvage what was left of his life. He threw himself into his business, making more deals and attending more events, but none of it brought him any real joy. His colleagues noticed the change in him, his once pristine confidence now replaced by a quiet desperation. Femi couldn't stop thinking about Bliss. She had become a ghost in his mind, haunting him with memories of what they had once shared. He knew he had hurt her, but he still couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of his actions. He had always thought that the world would bend to his will, that he could buy back anything he lost. But Bliss was different. She wasn't interested in his money anymore. She had found something he could never offer, herself. Bliss had been busy, too. Her business was flourishing. Women from all over the city were signing up for her fitness and wellness programs. She had become a symbol of empowerment, a woman who had overcome obstacles and found strength in herself. Her confidence radiated from her every move. She had learned to value herself, and in doing so, she had found a community of women who admired and respected her. Bliss was no longer just Femi's wife. She was her own person, and that was something Femi could never take away. One afternoon, Femi received an invitation to an exclusive charity event. It was the kind of high-profile gathering he couldn't afford to miss. After all, his reputation was on the line. He knew Bliss would be there. She had been invited as a guest of honor, a sign of just how much her life had changed in the short time they had been apart. As Femi arrived at the event, he felt an unfamiliar sense of dread. His palms were sweaty, and his mind raced with all the things he should say to Bliss. He knew he had to do something to fix this, but deep down he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had no idea what to expect, but one thing was certain. He had to face her. The venue was lavish, with sparkling chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests chatting and laughing over champagne. Femi scanned the room, his eyes searching for her. And then he saw her, Bliss, standing in the center of a group of women, laughing and enjoying herself. She was radiant, more beautiful than he had ever seen her. Her presence seemed to light up the room, and for a moment, Femi felt like a stranger in a place he once ruled. Bliss noticed him staring from across the room. She didn't smile or acknowledge his presence. Instead, she turned away and continued talking to the women around her, her focus entirely on the conversation. Femi felt a pang of rejection, but he pushed it down. He had to speak to her. He had to make her see that he could change, that he was still the man she had once loved. He made his way through the crowd, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached her, Bliss turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. "Bliss," Femi said, his voice low. I need to talk to you." Bliss glanced at him, her eyes calm but distant. "We don't need to talk, Femi. Not right now. Please," Femi pleaded. "Just give me a chance to explain. I've made mistakes. I've treated you horribly, and I know I can't take it back, but I want to make things right." Bliss took a step back, her gaze unwavering. "Femi, I've heard this before. You've said all the right things, but the truth is, your actions have never matched your words. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fine. I'm not the same woman I used to be. I've changed, and I'm not going to keep putting myself in a place where you can tear me down again." Femi's heart sank. This was worse than he had imagined. He had thought that maybe, just maybe, if he begged her enough, if he showed her how much he needed her, she would take him back. But this was different. Bliss wasn't the same woman who had cried in his arms, begging him to change. She had found her strength, and now she was standing firm. "I understand that I hurt you, Bliss," Femi said quietly, "but I don't know how to fix this. I've lost you, and I don't know if there's anything I can do to get you back." Bliss looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening, but only slightly. "Femi, you don't get it, do you? This isn't about winning me back. This is about me taking control of my own life. I've spent so many years living for you, trying to please you, trying to meet your expectations. But now I'm living for myself. And that's the most important thing I can do." Femi stood there, stunned, as Bliss turned away from him, rejoining the group of women she had been talking to. He watched her go, his heart heavy with the realization that she was no longer his to control. She had found herself, and he had lost her. The rest of the evening was a blur for Femi. He couldn't focus on anything other than Bliss. She was out of reach, and no matter how many times he tried to apologize or make amends, it was clear that she had already moved on. As Femi left the event, he sat in the back of his car, staring out of the window at the city lights. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing stood out above all else. He had lost the woman he had once taken for granted, and there was no easy way to get her back. In the days that followed, Femi tried everything to win her back. More calls, more gifts, even a public declaration of his love. But Bliss was unshaken. She had moved on, and Femi realized that no amount of money, no matter how many apologies he offered, could undo the years of pain he had caused her. But there was something even more painful than losing her. It was the realization that he had been the one to push her away. He had been blinded by his own arrogance, his own pride, and now he was facing the consequences. Femi's world had shifted in ways he never expected. Every day felt like a reminder of how far he had fallen from the man he once was. Respected, admired, untouchable. Now he was nothing more than a shadow of himself, chasing after a dream that seemed to slip further and further out of reach. Bliss was gone, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself that he could fix things, the reality of their separation was starting to sink in. He had always believed that success was the ultimate prize, that wealth could solve any problem. But now, surrounded by all his riches and luxury, he felt emptier than ever. His business deals no longer excited him, and the lavish parties and glamorous events that once fueled his ego felt hollow. Femi was losing his grip on everything that mattered, and deep down, he knew it was because of the one person who had always been his anchor, Bliss. Bliss, on the other hand, was thriving. Femi couldn't deny that. As the weeks passed, she seemed to be growing stronger, more confident with each passing day. Her business was booming, and she was becoming a voice of empowerment for women everywhere. She had truly transformed into a woman who no longer needed anyone's approval, least of all his. Femi heard the whispers, saw the social media posts, and read the glowing reports about Bliss. She was no longer just his wife. She was a brand in her own right, a symbol of strength and independence. People were taking notice, and they admired her not just for her beauty, but for her courage to rebuild her life after everything Femi had put her through. She was becoming the woman she was always meant to be, and Femi couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. He was proud of her success, but it stung to see her moving on without him. One evening, Femi sat alone in his office, staring at the glass of whiskey in his hand. The room was dark, the only light coming from the city lights outside the window. He couldn't escape the thoughts of Bliss, of how he had lost her. And for what? His pride, his insecurities. The woman who had once loved him unconditionally was now someone he could only watch from a distance, as if she were a stranger. Femi's phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from his lawyer. Femi, we need to discuss the divorce proceedings. Bliss is serious about moving forward with everything. It's time we come to terms with this. Femi stared at the message, his heart sinking. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to do. He had failed her. There was no sugarcoating it. Bliss was done with him, and no amount of pleading or gifts would bring her back. But then, as he sat there, the idea came to him. A plan, a last-ditch effort to win back what he had lost. It wasn't a business deal or a flashy display of wealth. It was something simpler, something that went beyond money. Femi had learned that the hard way. It was time to show Bliss that he had changed, that he was capable of being the man she needed, the man she deserved. It was time to show her he could be kind, empathetic, and humble. And maybe, just maybe, he could earn her forgiveness. The next morning, Femi woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. He called his lawyer and set up a meeting to begin the legal process of their divorce. But this time, things would be different. He wasn't going to fight her every step of the way. He wasn't going to use his wealth or status to force her to stay. This time, he was going to let her go, if that's what she wanted. But he also wanted to prove to her and to himself that he had changed. Femi decided to attend one of Bliss's events, the grand opening of a new fitness center she had just launched. It was going to be a big deal, packed with influential people, media, and potential clients. Femi had heard about it, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the urge to show up. Not to win her back, but to acknowledge her, to let her see that he was no longer the arrogant, mocking man who had belittled her for so long. As Femi arrived at the venue, the atmosphere was buzzing with energy. There was a sense of excitement in the air as people mingled, talking about the new fitness center and Bliss's journey. Femi stood by the entrance for a moment, taking it all in. He could see Bliss on the stage, surrounded by women who looked up to her. She was glowing, confident, and absolutely radiant. For a moment, Femi felt a sense of pride. This was the woman he had once loved, the woman he had once taken for granted. Bliss, however, seemed to have no idea Femi was in the crowd. She was busy giving a speech, inspiring the audience with her story of personal growth, of finding strength in the face of adversity. Her words resonated with everyone in the room, and Femi could see the admiration in their eyes. But as he watched her, he also saw something he hadn't expected: regret. Not for what he had done to her, but for how he had treated her all these years. He had missed out on the chance to be part of her journey, to support her, to love her the way she deserved. As the event came to a close, Femi stood off to the side, waiting for an opportunity to speak to Bliss. She was surrounded by people, and he didn't want to interrupt. But then, just as she was about to leave, their eyes met. She gave him a small nod, acknowledging his presence, but there was no warmth in it. Femi walked over slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't going to be easy. "Bliss," he said softly, his voice unsteady. "I just wanted to say, I see you now. I see the woman you've become, and I'm proud of you." Bliss looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Femi," she said, her voice cool but not dismissive. "But you don't have to say anything. I've moved on." Femi swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I know. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I've hurt you in ways I can't undo, but I'm not that man anymore." Bliss's eyes softened, but only for a second. "You can't change the past, Femi, but you can change the future, and that's what I'm doing. I'm moving forward, with or without you." The words stung, but they also felt like a final release. Femi realized that this wasn't about winning her back anymore. It was about acknowledging the mistakes he had made, the hurt he had caused, and letting her go with dignity. Bliss smiled faintly before turning to leave, but then she paused. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Femi, and I truly hope you find peace." With that, she walked away, leaving Femi standing there in the midst of the crowd, watching her disappear into the distance. For the first time in a long while, Femi felt like he could breathe. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: he had finally let go of the past. The days following Bliss's departure from the event were the hardest Femi had ever faced. There were moments of clarity, where he realized just how much he had lost and how little time he had left to make things right. But there were also moments of deep frustration and doubt. He had tried to change, to show Bliss that he was a better man, but nothing seemed to make a difference. It was as though no matter how hard he tried, the walls he had built between them were too high to scale. Femi spent his days at the office, buried in paperwork and business dealings, trying to keep his mind off the emptiness that had settled in his heart. His staff noticed the change in him. He wasn't the same confident leader they had once known. He was distant, distracted, and they could feel the tension in the air whenever he walked into a room. But Femi didn't care. His thoughts were consumed by Bliss, and no matter how hard he tried to push them away, she was always there, lingering in the back of his mind. It wasn't just the loss of her presence that haunted him. It was the realization that he had never truly understood her. He had spent so many years focused on his own desires and ego that he never took the time to really see her, to listen to her needs. Bliss had always been the one to support him, to stand by him when the world was against him. And yet, he had mocked her, belittled her, and treated her like she wasn't good enough. He couldn't undo the past, no matter how hard he wished he could. One evening, as Femi sat alone in his office, a call came through. It was his lawyer again. "Femi, we need to talk. It's about the divorce settlement." Femi's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this call, but hearing the words out loud made everything feel so final. He had known that Bliss was serious about ending their marriage, but the reality of it was sinking in with full force now. The woman he had once taken for granted was moving on with her life, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The lawyer continued, "Bliss has made it clear that she wants a clean break. She's not asking for much, just what she's entitled to. But I need you to review the documents and let me know if you have any concerns." Femi could hear the words, but they felt distant, as if they were coming from someone else. His mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had lost her, and no amount of money or status could change that. He could feel the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him, and for the first time in a long time, he realized that all the money in the world couldn't buy him back her love. As he hung up the phone, Femi leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The silence in the room felt suffocating, like a heavy fog that he couldn't escape. He thought about all the times he had taken Bliss for granted, all the times he had dismissed her feelings, and how he had never truly seen her for who she was. He had been so blinded by his own ambition and ego that he couldn't see the woman who had stood by his side, who had loved him despite his flaws. Femi knew that he needed to change, that he couldn't keep living in the past. But where would he start? How could he ever redeem himself in her eyes? He couldn't undo the years of hurt, but maybe he could find a way to prove to himself that he was capable of being a better man. Not for Bliss, but for his own peace of mind. The next day, Femi made a decision. He called his lawyer and asked for the divorce papers. He knew what needed to be done. He wasn't going to fight her anymore. It was time to let go. He wasn't going to keep holding on to something that wasn't meant to be. He had already lost Bliss, and he had to accept that. But as Femi prepared to sign the papers, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he could do. He needed closure. He needed to see Bliss one last time, to apologize properly, to tell her that he had finally understood the lessons he should have learned years ago. It was with a heavy heart that Femi made his way to Bliss's office the following afternoon. She was sitting at her desk, looking every bit the successful woman she had become. Her office was sleek, modern, and filled with motivational quotes and images of strong women, symbols of the transformation she had gone through. Bliss didn't look up when Femi entered, but he could feel the shift in the air. "Bliss," he said quietly, his voice betraying the emotion he had tried so hard to hide. "I just wanted to talk. I know I've made a mess of everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. For all the hurt I caused you, for all the times I made you feel less than you are. I see you now, Bliss. I see the incredible woman you've become, and I'm proud of you. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." Bliss finally looked up, her eyes steady, but there was no anger in them, only a quiet resignation. "Femi, I appreciate your words, but I need you to understand that it's not enough. You can't undo the damage you've caused with a few words. I've moved on, and I can't keep waiting for you to realize what you had." Femi's heart sank, but he didn't flinch. He knew she was right. He had waited too long to truly see her, and now it was too late. "I don't expect you to change your mind, Bliss," he said, his voice steady but heavy with regret. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, for myself, and for the person I should have been for you." Bliss nodded slowly. "I hope you find peace, Femi. I really do. But it's time for both of us to move on. You've held on to the past for so long, but it's time to let it go." Femi stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. It was a finality he wasn't ready for, but one he knew he had to face. As he turned to leave, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. Maybe it was because he had finally spoken the truth, or maybe it was because he had let go of the one thing that had been holding him back for so long. But whatever it was, Femi knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep running from his mistakes. It was time to face them and to let go of the past. As he walked out of the office, Femi knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The weeks that followed Bliss's final decision were the quietest Femi had known in years. The weight of his regrets settled around him like an anchor, pulling him deeper into reflection. He spent long hours at his desk, staring at his phone, unable to call her, unable to reach out. He had pushed her away, and now she was gone. Femi had always believed that he could fix anything with money or power, but he was learning the hard way that some things couldn't be bought or fixed with wealth. At work, Femi was still trying to keep up appearances. His team continued to work around him, respecting his authority, but they could tell he wasn't the same. They whispered behind his back, concerned for him, but Femi wasn't ready to let them in. They didn't understand. They didn't know the kind of pain he was feeling. He had always been the one who fixed things, the one who had all the answers. But now, he was struggling to fix the one thing that mattered most, his own broken heart. Bliss, on the other hand, was flourishing. Her wellness brand had gained even more traction. She was being invited to speak at conferences, and articles were being written about her and her journey. Women across the city, and even beyond, admired her strength and resilience. She had become a symbol of empowerment. Her story was inspiring. And yet, despite her success, Bliss remained grounded. She never allowed her achievements to change the essence of who she was. She had learned to love herself, and nothing could take that away. But even as Bliss was becoming more successful, Femi couldn't help but wonder if there was a part of her that still remembered the man he had been when they were happy together. Was there a tiny part of her that still cared? Or had she truly moved on, completely detached from everything they had shared? Femi found himself asking these questions as he walked through the halls of his mansion late one night. The house felt empty now, each room a reminder of the life he had lost. The grandeur of his surroundings only made him feel more isolated. He was surrounded by luxury, but it meant nothing without someone to share it with. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Femi was scrolling through social media when a post caught his eye. It was an image of Bliss, taken at one of her recent events, her face radiant and filled with confidence. The caption read, "Living for me, not for anyone else. #empowered, #self-love, #new beginnings." Femi stared at the photo, his heart heavy. It was a clear statement of how far she had come. She had truly found herself, and he couldn't deny the sense of awe that filled him. But then, something in the photo stood out. In the background, just behind Bliss, was a man, a familiar face. Femi's eyes narrowed as he studied the image. It was a man she had been photographed with at several events, and in this particular picture, he was standing close to her, laughing. Femi couldn't help the surge of jealousy that rose in his chest. Who was this man? Was this the person she had been spending time with? Was he replacing him? The thought hit Femi like a punch to the gut. He had always believed that no one could replace him in her life, that no one could love her the way he had. But now, seeing her with someone else, the possibility became all too real. It made him realize just how much he had taken her for granted, how he had failed to see her needs while he was wrapped up in his own world. That night, Femi couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts of Bliss, the man in the photo, and the decisions he had made that had led to this point. He realized that he had always been afraid of losing control, of losing her, but in the process, he had pushed her away. Now it was too late to fix things. Or was it? As the days passed, Femi couldn't stop thinking about that photo. He wanted to know more about the man who was getting so close to Bliss, who was sharing her success, her time, her life. The jealousy gnawed at him, but it also pushed him into action. He knew that if he didn't do something, he would lose her for good. And even though he had accepted the end of their marriage, something inside him stirred. Maybe he wasn't truly ready to let go. Femi's inner battle continued. He had already given Bliss the space she needed, but this new development, this new man in her life, had shaken him. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. Whether he wanted her back or simply needed to know that she was happy without him. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't want to be the man who stood on the sidelines, watching her live the life they had once dreamed of, with someone else. The next week, Femi reached out to a mutual acquaintance, a journalist who had written about Bliss's business before. He asked for information on the man in the photo. The journalist hesitated at first, but Femi's persistence won out. After a few calls, he learned that the man was a business associate of Bliss, someone who had recently partnered with her on a new project. His name was Gabriel, and he had been an integral part of Bliss's new fitness center's expansion. The news stung Femi more than he had expected. This wasn't just a random person. This was someone important in her life, someone who was working closely with her on a project she was passionate about. Femi didn't know what to do with this information. He wasn't sure if he wanted to confront her about it, or if he simply wanted to know that she had found someone who could make her happy. He wasn't sure if he was ready to see her with another man, even if they weren't romantically involved. It was still hard for him to let go of the idea that he was the one who should have been by her side, supporting her, loving her. And then, just as he was about to put the matter out of his mind, Femi received a message from Bliss. It was brief, simple, and to the point. "Can we meet?" Femi's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in a while, he felt a flicker of hope. Was she reaching out to him? Was she willing to have a conversation, to talk about everything that had happened? Or was this just a formality? An exchange of final words? The meeting was set for the next day. Femi spent the night tossing and turning, his mind racing with possibilities. Would she tell him about Gabriel? Was this the moment when everything would change for him, for both of them? Or was it simply another step toward closure? As Femi arrived at the cafe where they were supposed to meet, he felt his nerves rise. The woman he had once known so well now seemed like a stranger in some ways. But no matter what happened, Femi knew one thing for sure. This was a conversation he couldn't avoid. Whatever Bliss had to say, he had to listen. When he saw her walking toward him, looking as radiant as ever, a wave of emotion hit him. This was it. Femi sat nervously at the cafe, his hands trembling slightly as he fiddled with the cup of coffee in front of him. He had never been one to doubt himself, but today, everything felt different. His heart was racing, and his mind was spinning with thoughts of what Bliss might say. She had reached out to him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was a turning point, one way or another. The cafe was quiet, with soft jazz music playing in the background and the hum of quiet conversations from other patrons. Femi glanced at the door every few seconds, waiting for her to arrive. It felt like the longest wait of his life, each minute dragging on longer than the last. He didn't know if he was ready for what was coming, but he knew he had no choice but to face it. And then she walked in. Bliss. She looked different from the woman he had once known. Stronger, more confident, and yet there was still that kindness in her eyes that he had always loved. She walked in with a sense of purpose, her posture tall and commanding. But when her gaze met his, there was a soft, almost vulnerable look in her eyes. Femi's heart skipped a beat as she walked toward him, and for a moment, he was reminded of everything he had lost. The memories rushed back. Her smile, her laughter, the way she would look at him when she truly cared. But it was all in the past now, and he couldn't dwell on it. Bliss sat down across from him, offering a polite but distant smile. She looked composed, like she had everything under control. But Femi could see the weight of the situation in the way she carried herself. There was an air of finality about her, and he knew that whatever they were about to talk about would determine the next step in both their lives. "Thank you for meeting me, Femi," Bliss said, her voice calm but with a hint of emotion that she was carefully masking. Femi nodded, his throat tight. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm glad you reached out." His voice faltered, but he quickly steadied himself. "How are you?" Bliss hesitated for a moment before answering, her eyes flicking briefly to the table before meeting his gaze again. "I'm doing well. Better, actually. I've come a long way since everything happened." Femi swallowed hard, the reality of her words hitting him. She was truly moving on. She had healed, or at least she was well on her way to it. He wasn't sure if he could say the same about himself. "I'm glad to hear that," he said softly, his voice full of regret. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Bliss took a deep breath before speaking again. "Femi, I didn't reach out to reopen old wounds. I know what happened between us. I know I've hurt you and I've also been hurt, but I think it's time for us to have a final conversation. One that will allow us both to truly move on." Femi felt a pang of pain at her words, but he nodded. This was it, the moment he had feared and hoped for all at once. He had to face whatever she was about to say, no matter how difficult it was. "I'm ready," he said quietly. "I know I messed up, and I know I can't change the past. But I need to say this, Bliss, I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry for how I treated you. I let my insecurities and ego control me, and I hurt you in the process. I took you for granted, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Bliss listened quietly, her expression neutral but her eyes betraying a flicker of emotion. She had heard him say apologies before, but this time, it felt different. There was something genuine in his voice, something that hadn't been there before. "I believe you," she said after a long pause. "But apologies are just words, Femi. I've heard them before. What matters now is the actions that follow." Femi nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I know it's not enough, but I've spent so much time reflecting, and I've realized that I can't keep living in the past. I can't keep blaming myself for everything. I need to move forward, too. But first, I wanted to ask you, do you think there's any chance we can ever be friends again? The question hung in the air between them, fragile and delicate. Bliss didn't answer immediately. She took a slow breath, considering his words carefully. For a moment, Femi thought she wouldn't answer at all, but then she spoke. "I don't know, Femi," she said softly. "I'm not the same person I was when we were together, and I don't want to go back to that place where I was constantly trying to please you, trying to meet your expectations. I've built a life for myself now. I've learned to stand on my own 2 feet, and while I'll always care about you, I can't go back to the old version of us." Femi's heart ached at her words, but he understood. He had been selfish for too long, and now he had to accept that he couldn't rewrite history. He had to accept the reality of where they were and let her go completely, without holding on to the past. Bliss continued, her voice steady. "As for being friends, I think in time it might be possible. But not now. I need more space. I need to focus on myself and my future. I need to keep growing, and I need to do it without looking back." Femi felt a sting in his chest, but he nodded. "I understand. I really do. And I respect that. I'll never stop wishing the best for you. Bliss, you've earned everything you have, and I hope you continue to achieve everything you've dreamed of." Bliss smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Femi. That means a lot to me." The silence between them felt different now, less heavy, less painful. It was as if a weight had been lifted, not just from Femi, but from both of them. They had said what needed to be said, and for the first time in a long while, Femi felt like he could breathe again. "Can I ask you something, Femi?" Bliss asked suddenly, her tone shifting slightly. "Of course," Femi replied, eager to hear whatever she had to say. Bliss hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Do you think you can find happiness without me?" Femi froze at the question. It was a simple one, but it carried so much weight. Could he really find happiness without her? Could he truly move forward, knowing that she was no longer a part of his life? For a long moment, Femi didn't answer. He didn't know the answer himself. But deep down, he knew one thing: he had to try. He had to find peace with himself, with the mistakes he had made, and with the life he had ahead of him. He couldn't keep holding on to the past. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "But I have to. I have to let go of the past and find a way to move forward." Bliss nodded as if she understood. "That's the first step, Femi. And I hope you find the peace you're looking for." They sat in silence for a while, the conversation winding down. Femi knew this was the last time they would meet like this. Sitting across from each other, holding on to the past, unsure of what the future held. But as he looked at Bliss one last time, he realized that he was finally ready to let go. It was time to stop looking back, time to start living for himself. As they stood to leave, Femi felt a sense of finality. But it wasn't sad. It wasn't bitter. It was simply the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Bliss turned to leave, but before she did, she gave him one last smile. A small, genuine smile that held no resentment, only the quiet understanding that they had both moved on. "Goodbye, Femi," she said softly. "Goodbye, Bliss," he replied, his voice steady. As he watched her walk away, Femi felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to face it. The days after the meeting with Bliss were both the quietest and the loudest of Femi's life. The silence in the mansion had never been so deafening, the emptiness so consuming. He had spent years with someone who had been his partner, his confidant, and now she was gone. The realization of what he had truly lost weighed on him like an invisible burden, a reminder that no amount of money or status could ever replace the love he had once shared with her. But something else had changed within Femi. As he walked through the empty halls of his home, he felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the first time in a long while that he felt like he was no longer fighting against himself. He wasn't chasing after something he couldn't have anymore. He wasn't chasing bliss. He was learning to let go. Femi continued with his work, but it no longer consumed him the way it had in the past. He had built an empire, but it didn't feel as important as it once did. He still enjoyed the thrill of a good deal, the rush of closing a contract, but now there was a part of him that questioned whether he had been living for the right reasons all along. He had spent so much time striving for success, thinking that achievement was the key to everything. But he was beginning to realize that true fulfillment came from within, not from what others thought of him or from the things he could buy. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk, Femi's phone buzzed with a message. It was from one of his old friends, Olu, someone Femi had known for years. They had kept in touch over the years, but their conversations were always surface level. Today, however, the message was different. Olu, hey Femi, I know we haven't really talked in a while. I've been seeing what you've been going through, and I think it's time we catch up. You've been too quiet lately, my friend. Let me know if you're free. Femi stared at the message for a moment. He hadn't heard from Olu in months, and he had been avoiding all his old friends. It wasn't that he didn't value their relationships. He just couldn't bring himself to face anyone. He didn't want to explain what had happened between him and Bliss, and he wasn't sure he wanted to admit to anyone how much he had been struggling. But something in Olu's message struck a chord with him. He hadn't felt this way in a long time. He realized that he was isolating himself, shutting out the very people who might help him find his way back. He wasn't alone in this world, no matter how much it felt like it. There were people who cared about him, who wanted to see him succeed, not just in business but in life. Femi typed a response, his fingers trembling slightly. Femi, you're right, Olu. I've been lost in my own thoughts. I'd love to catch up. Let's meet tomorrow. The next day, Femi and Olu met at a small cafe near Femi's office. It was the kind of place that felt warm and unpretentious, a stark contrast to the cold, polished world Femi had grown used to. Olu was already sitting at a table when Femi arrived, his broad smile a reminder of the genuine friendship they had shared before Femi became consumed by his own ambition. Femi, long time no see, man, Olu said, standing to shake his hand. Femi smiled, feeling a strange sense of relief. It's good to see you, Olu. I've missed this. They sat down, and for the first time in a while, Femi felt like he could breathe again. Olu ordered them both coffee, and they settled into an easy conversation about work, life, and everything in between. I've been following what's been going on with you, Olu said after a while, his tone serious but not judgmental. It's been tough, I know. Losing Bliss, seeing everything you worked for start to fall apart. But Femi, let me ask you something. How are you really doing? Femi's heart sank at the question. He had avoided asking himself that very question for so long, afraid of the answer. He wasn't sure if he was ready to admit the truth even to himself, let alone to his friend. I don't know, Femi admitted, his voice quiet. I've been pretending to be fine. I've been keeping busy with work, trying to fill the emptiness with more business deals, more success. But it's not enough. It's never been enough. Olu leaned in, his expression softening. You've been so focused on building your empire, Femi. But sometimes, the things we chase don't bring us happiness. It's not about how many deals you make or how many zeros are on your paycheck. It's about the people you have around you, the connections you make, and the person you become in the process. Femi felt the weight of Olu's words. He had heard them before in different forms, but it was only now, after everything had fallen apart, that they truly resonated with him. It wasn't about the wealth. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition. It was about who he was at his core and what he could give back to the world. I've been so focused on proving myself, Femi said, his voice tinged with regret. I thought that if I was successful enough, I could make everyone around me happy. I thought if I built the perfect life, everything would fall into place. But now, I realize that I've been living for everyone else, not for myself. Olu nodded. It's easy to get caught up in that, especially when you've had the success you've had. But Femi, it's never too late to change. You can't go back and fix the past, but you can start fresh. You can choose to live for you now, not for anyone else. Femi sat back in his chair, taking in Olu's words. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. It was as if a new path was opening up before him, one that wasn't defined by his past mistakes, his ego, or his business empire. It was a path toward something more meaningful, something real. I don't know where to start, Femi admitted, his voice softer now. But I know I can't keep living like this. Olu smiled kindly. Start small, my friend. Take things one step at a time. You've already taken the hardest step by realizing you need to change. Everything else will follow. For the first time in months, Femi felt a glimmer of optimism. He had spent so much time dwelling on the past, on the things he couldn't change, that he had forgotten the most important lesson. Life was about moving forward, not backward. Over the next few weeks, Femi began to make small changes in his life. He didn't rush into anything or try to force himself into some new version of himself. Instead, he focused on building healthier habits, reaching out to the people who cared about him, and slowly rediscovering the things that brought him joy, things he had long forgotten. He made time for his friends, for his family, and most importantly, for himself. As he continued on this new path, Femi realized that while he might never be the man he once was, he was finally starting to become the man he had always wanted to be. A man at peace with himself, with his mistakes, and with the future ahead of him. But one question still lingered in Femi's mind. Would he ever find a way to reconcile with Bliss? Would they ever cross paths again? Or was their chapter truly closed? The answer, Femi knew, would come in time. The months that followed Femi's quiet transformation felt like a slow but steady journey of healing. It wasn't a straight path. There were days filled with doubt, moments when the weight of his past mistakes would press down on him like a stone. But there was also something that kept him moving forward: hope. Femi had never been one to dwell on his mistakes for too long. He had always been focused on solutions, on moving quickly, on getting ahead. But this time he wasn't in a rush. He allowed himself the space to process everything, to feel the pain, and to learn from it. He made a conscious effort to reach out to the people who cared about him, to build new relationships with those who had been there for him in the past, and to surround himself with the kind of people who uplifted him rather than fed his ego. In the process, he found a deeper connection with himself. He realized that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His worth wasn't defined by his net worth, his business deals, or his past mistakes. It was defined by who he was, by the lessons he had learned, and by his willingness to keep moving forward, no matter how many setbacks he faced. But despite his progress, there was one question Femi had never been able to shake. What about Bliss? He had let her go, or at least he had tried to. But deep inside, a part of him still wondered if there was a way to find redemption with her. Could they ever be more than strangers to each other again? Could he ever regain her trust, even if they could never go back to what they had? Femi hadn't seen Bliss in months. Her business had grown even bigger, and she had become a respected figure in the industry. Her image was everywhere, and while Femi was proud of her, he couldn't deny the pang of jealousy that occasionally gripped his chest. Not because he wanted to control her or be a part of her success, but because he missed her presence in his life, more than he had ever realized. One afternoon, Femi was sitting in his office, reviewing some contracts, when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Olu. Olu, Femi, I saw Bliss at a fundraiser tonight. She looked amazing. I know you've been trying to move on, but maybe it's time to have one last conversation with her. If you're ready. Femi stared at the message for a long time. He hadn't expected to hear anything about Bliss, especially from Olu. The idea of seeing her again stirred up feelings he had tried to keep buried. He had told himself he was done with the past, that he was at peace. But now, the thought of reconnecting with her, just to have closure or perhaps even a new beginning, felt like the right thing to do. The next day, Femi found himself standing in front of Bliss's office building. His palms were sweaty, and his heart was racing. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but he knew he had to face her again. This time, it wasn't about trying to win her back. It was about finally letting go of the guilt and the uncertainty. It was about finding peace with her, whether or not they could ever be a part of each other's lives again. He walked into the building, and the receptionist greeted him with a smile. "Mr. Femi, how can I help you?" "I'm here to see Bliss," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just need to talk to her." The receptionist paused, eyeing him carefully. "She's in a meeting right now, but I can let her know you're here." Femi nodded, grateful for the chance to wait. A few minutes later, the receptionist came back with a message. "Bliss says she'll be out in just a moment. Please have a seat." Femi sat down in the waiting area, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he would say when he saw her, but he knew it was time to face her. To face the woman he had wronged and learn to live with the consequences of his actions. A few minutes later, Bliss walked into the room. She looked as radiant as ever, her presence commanding and graceful. She paused when she saw Femi, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Femi?" she said softly, her voice steady but with a hint of emotion. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I know," Femi replied, his voice nervous but sincere. "I wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do, but I think it's time. I need to talk to you. I owe you that much." Bliss studied him for a moment, her gaze calm but guarded. "All right, let's talk." They walked to a nearby cafe, where they sat in silence for a few moments. Femi could feel the weight of the conversation ahead of him. He didn't know if this would be the last time they spoke or if it was the beginning of something new. But either way, he knew this was his chance to find peace. "Bliss," he began, his voice low. "I've thought a lot about us, about everything that happened. I've spent so many months trying to make sense of it. And the truth is, I hurt you. I took you for granted. I didn't see the incredible woman you were, and for that, I'm truly sorry." Bliss looked at him, her eyes steady but softening with every word he said. "Femi, I've heard you say this before. You've apologized, and I've forgiven you. But I need you to understand something. Forgiveness doesn't mean that everything can go back to the way it was. It means that I've accepted what happened and I've let it go." Femi nodded, the truth of her words settling in. "I know. I understand that now. I don't expect anything from you, Bliss. I don't expect us to go back to what we were. But I wanted you to know that I've changed. I'm not the man I was when I hurt you, and I'm not asking for you to come back into my life. I just wanted to tell you that I'm truly sorry, and I hope that, someday, you can find peace with what happened between us." Bliss was quiet for a moment, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "Femi, I've found peace. I found happiness in my life, and I've learned to live for myself. That's something I never thought I would say after everything we went through, but it's the truth." Femi smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve everything you've worked for, Bliss. You're an incredible woman, and I'm proud of you." Bliss smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you, Femi. I hope you find the peace you're looking for too." They sat there for a while, the air between them calm and full of understanding. It wasn't the reunion Femi had once imagined, but it was better than he had hoped for. They had both moved on, in their own ways, and they had both found the peace they had been searching for. As they parted ways, Femi felt lighter than he had in months. The burden of regret, of wanting to go back and change the past, had been lifted. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he was ready to face it, whatever it may be. Bliss walked away, and Femi watched her go, knowing that this chapter of his life had finally closed. The past was behind him, and he was ready to move forward.
The long blonde hair wrapped around my finger like a noose, mocking me as I stood in our marble shower. My own dark curls had never been that color, and Trevor's hair was black as midnight. Yet here it was, tangled in the drain of our private bathroom, the one only we used. My hands shook as I held the evidence up to the light. 3 years of marriage, 5 years together, and this is how I find out. Not through lipstick on his collar or strange phone calls. A single hair that didn't belong to either of us. I'm Zara Thompson, and until that moment I thought I had the perfect life. My husband Trevor was a successful lawyer, we lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, and I worked as a marketing consultant from home. We had plans for children, dreams of growing old together, and a love I thought was unbreakable. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as reality crashed down on me. Trevor was cheating. My husband, the man who promised to love and honor me, was bringing another woman into our home, into our sacred space. I sat on the edge of our bathtub, the same tub where we used to take romantic baths together. The hair was still in my hand and I stared at it like it might disappear if I looked hard enough. But it remained real, blonde, and damning. My mind raced back to the past few months. Trevor had been working late more often, claiming big cases needed his attention. He'd started going to the gym early in the mornings, saying he wanted to get in shape. His phone had a new password, something he'd never felt the need for before. All the signs were there and I'd ignored them like a fool. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak. In the mirror, I saw my reflection, a beautiful African-American woman with kind eyes and a trusting heart that had just been shattered. My dark skin looked pale somehow, my usually bright smile nowhere to be found. The blonde hair seemed to burn in my palm. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to confront Trevor the moment he walked through the door. But something stopped me. A cold, calculating anger that I'd never felt before began to replace the shock and hurt. If Trevor wanted to play games, I would play them better. I walked to our bedroom and opened his laptop. His password was still our anniversary date. How romantic of him to keep it while betraying everything it represented. His browser history told me everything I needed to know. Restaurant reservations I knew nothing about. Hotel bookings in the city. And worst of all, searches for jewelry stores. He was buying her gifts with our money while lying to my face every single day. I found her name in his email, Rebecca Stone, a local news anchor I recognized from the morning show. Beautiful, blonde, and apparently lacking any morals about sleeping with married men. Her messages to him were full of hearts and promises to leave her own boyfriend soon. They'd been together for 4 months. 4 months of lies, for months of him coming home to me after being with her, for months of me cooking dinner and asking about his day while he plotted our future. But what hurt the most was reading his response to her concerns about their affair. Don't worry about Zara. She's clueless and completely dependent on me. She'll never find out, and even if she does, she can't survive without me. Clueless. Dependent. Those words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. I closed the laptop and walked back to the bathroom. The blonde hair was still on the counter where I'd placed it. I picked it up again and made my decision. Trevor thought I was helpless and naive. He thought he could continue this charade indefinitely while I remained his faithful, stupid wife at home. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. I opened our medicine cabinet and looked at his expensive shampoo, the one he'd recently switched to because Rebecca probably told him it made his hair look better. My hand reached for it, then stopped. This required planning. This required precision. If I was going to destroy his life the way he'd destroyed mine, I needed to be smart about it. I put the hair in a small plastic bag and hid it in my jewelry box. Evidence for later. Then I sat at my computer and began researching. Hair removal cream, public records, social media strategies, and divorce lawyers. Trevor thought he was so clever, but he'd forgotten one important thing about me. I wasn't just his wife, I was a successful marketing consultant who knew exactly how to destroy someone's reputation and build a brand. His brand was about to become that of a cheating, lying husband who got exactly what he deserved. The war was about to begin and he didn't even know he'd already lost. The next morning, I watched Trevor get ready for work like I had 1,000 times before. But everything felt different now. When he kissed my forehead and said he loved me, I wanted to vomit. When he told me he might be late again because of a big case, I nodded and smiled like the devoted wife he thought I was. Have a great day, honey, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. As soon as his car pulled out of our driveway, I sprang into action. I had a plan and it needed to be executed perfectly. My first stop was the drugstore across town, far from anywhere Trevor might go. I bought hair removal cream, the strongest kind they sold. The kind that promised to remove even the thickest hair in minutes. I paid in cash and wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, feeling like a spy in my own life. Back home, I stood in our bathroom holding the hair removal cream and Trevor's expensive shampoo bottle. My hands trembled slightly as I opened both containers. This was at the point of no return. The thick, blue shampoo poured down the drain as I emptied the bottle. I rinsed it thoroughly, then carefully poured in the hair removal cream. It was almost the same color, just slightly different in texture. I added a drop of blue food coloring to match it perfectly. My heart pounded as I shook the bottle gently, mixing it all together. It looked exactly like his regular shampoo. Trevor, who barely paid attention to anything domestic, would never notice the difference. I placed the bottle back exactly where it had been, making sure everything looked normal. Then I sat on our bed and stared at what I'd just done. Part of me felt sick. This wasn't who I was. I didn't hurt people, even when they hurt me. I was the woman who rescued spiders instead of killing them, who donated to charity every month, who believed in kindness and forgiveness. But Trevor's words echoed in my mind, "She's clueless and completely dependent on me." I wasn't clueless. I wasn't dependent. And I certainly wasn't going to be a victim. I spent the rest of the day researching divorce lawyers and documenting everything I could find about Trevor's affair. I printed emails, took screenshots, and organized evidence like I was preparing for the most important presentation of my life. Which, in a way, I was. I also researched Rebecca Stone thoroughly. She was 28, had been working at Channel 7 News for 2 years, and was engaged to a doctor named Paul Martinez. Her social media was full of pictures of her perfect life, her perfect hair, and her perfect relationship except for the part where she was sleeping with my husband. When Trevor came home that evening, I had dinner ready and a smile on my face. He seemed relaxed, probably coming from her apartment. The thought made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. "How was work?" I asked, setting his plate in front of him. "Long day," he said, not meeting my eyes. "This case is really demanding. I might have to work even longer hours next week." "Of course, honey. I understand." I sat across from him and watched him eat the meal I'd prepared while he lied to my face. We made small talk about his day, my work, the weather, all the mundane conversations of a married couple. But underneath it all, I was counting down the hours until morning, when he would wash his hair with my special mixture. That night, as we lay in bed, Trevor pulled me close and whispered how much he loved me. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. Instead, I smiled and told him I loved him too, hating myself for the lie but knowing it was necessary for my plan. I barely slept. Every few hours, I would check the time and calculate how many hours were left. At 5 a.m., I heard Trevor's alarm go off. He always showered before his morning gym session, a new habit that I now knew was really about looking good for Rebecca. I pretended to be asleep as he got up and walked to the bathroom. My heart hammered against my ribs as I heard the shower turn on. This was it. In a few minutes, Trevor's perfect hair would start dissolving away, just like he'd dissolved our marriage with his lies. I heard him moving around in the shower, probably shampooing his hair with his usual careful attention. He was vain about his appearance, always making sure every hair was in place. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 minutes later, he emerged from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, getting ready to blow dry his hair like he did every morning. I watched him through barely opened eyes, waiting for the moment he would discover what I'd done. But nothing happened. He dried his hair, styled it, and left for the gym looking exactly the same as always. Disappointment crashed over me. Had I not put enough hair removal cream in the shampoo? Had I miscalculated somehow? Then I remembered reading that hair removal cream sometimes took a few applications to work completely, especially on thick hair like Trevor's. Patience, I told myself. Good things come to those who wait. And I was about to prove just how good I was at waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. 3 days passed with no visible changes to Trevor's hair, and I began to wonder if my plan had failed completely. Maybe the hair removal cream had been diluted too much, or maybe Trevor's thick hair was more resistant than I'd expected. But on Thursday morning, everything changed. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a strange noise from upstairs, a kind of panicked yelp that didn't sound like Trevor at all. Then came the sound of running water and what sounded like frantic scrubbing. My pulse quickened. Could it be working? I crept upstairs quietly, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The bathroom door was closed, but I could hear Trevor moving around frantically inside. Water was running, drawers were opening and closing, and I could hear him muttering under his breath. What the hell? What the hell is happening? I pressed my ear to the door, my heart racing with anticipation and a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. This can't be real, I heard him say, his voice higher than usual. This isn't possible. The shower turned on again. Then off. Then on again. He was definitely panicking about something. I quickly went back downstairs and resumed making coffee, trying to look as normal as possible. About 10 minutes later, Trevor came down the stairs, but something was different about his appearance. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, which was strange because he never wore hats indoors. "Morning, honey," I said brightly, not looking up from my coffee mug. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," he said quickly, his voice strained. I'm going to be late for work. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door without his usual kiss goodbye. I pretended not to notice, but inside I was celebrating. Something was definitely wrong with his hair. After he left, I went upstairs to investigate. The bathroom was a mess, towels everywhere, the sink covered in what looked like loose hair, and the trash can overflowing with tissues. Trevor had clearly been trying to clean up evidence of something. In the shower drain, I found clumps of his thick black hair mixed with the blonde hair that had started this whole thing. The hair removal cream was working, just slower than I'd expected. I cleaned up the bathroom carefully, removing all traces of his panic while feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Trevor was about to learn what it felt like to have his perfect image destroyed. That evening he came home wearing the same baseball cap and claimed he had a headache when I asked why he was still wearing it inside. At dinner, he barely spoke and kept touching his head nervously. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked with fake concern. "You seem stressed." "Just work stuff," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. That night, I heard him in the bathroom again, running water and making frustrated noises. The hair removal cream was continuing to work, and Trevor was clearly losing the battle to save his precious hair. By Friday morning he couldn't hide it anymore. I was getting dressed when he emerged from the bathroom looking absolutely devastated. The baseball cap was still on his head, but I could see patches of bare scalp around the edges where his hairline used to be. "Trevor," I said, trying to sound shocked, "what happened to your hair?" His face crumpled. "I don't know. It just started falling out yesterday. I think I might have some kind of medical condition." I walked over to him and gently lifted his cap before he could stop me. What I saw was even better than I'd hoped. His hair wasn't just thinning, it was gone in huge patches, leaving his scalp spotted and uneven. The parts that remained looked weak and brittle. "Oh my goodness," I gasped, covering my mouth in fake horror. "Honey, we need to get you to a doctor right away." Trevor looked at himself in the mirror and his face went white. "This is a disaster, Zara. I have court appearances next week. I have clients to meet. I can't look like this." "Maybe it's stress-related," I suggested innocently. "Have you been under a lot of pressure at work lately?" His eyes met mine in the mirror, and for a moment I thought he might be suspicious. But Trevor's ego was too big to imagine that his naive, dependent wife could ever outsmart him. "I'll call Dr. Peterson," he said weakly. "Maybe he can prescribe something." I nodded sympathetically while inside I was laughing. No doctor was going to be able to fix what I'd done to his hair. The hair removal cream had done its work too thoroughly. "Don't worry," I said, rubbing his shoulder in what looked like a supportive gesture. "Hair grows back. And you know I love you no matter what you look like." The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. I'd loved him no matter what, and he'd thrown that love away for a blonde news anchor who wouldn't even look at him once his perfect appearance was ruined. Trevor spent the rest of the morning making phone calls to doctors, to his office, to what I assumed were hair restoration specialists. I listened from the kitchen as his voice got more and more desperate with each conversation. No one could give him the quick fix he desperately needed. His hair was gone, his confidence was shattered, and his perfect image was crumbling right before his eyes. Just like my trust in him had crumbled when I found that blonde hair in our shower. The best part was that he still had no idea this was just the beginning. By Saturday, Trevor's hair situation had become impossible to hide. What remained of his once thick hair was falling out in clumps every time he touched his head. He tried 3 different types of hair products, visited an emergency dermatologist, and even considered wearing a wig. But I wasn't done with my investigation. While Trevor was locked in the bathroom trying to find a solution to his hair crisis, I decided it was time to gather more evidence. I logged into his phone account online and downloaded months of text messages. What I found made my blood boil all over again. Trevor and Rebecca hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been planning my complete humiliation. Messages from just 2 weeks ago showed them discussing Trevor's plan to divorce me and take everything in the settlement. "She's so trusting she'll never see it coming," Trevor had texted. "My lawyer says I can probably keep the house and most of our assets since she doesn't really contribute financially." Rebecca's response was even worse. "Can't wait to redecorate that house. Her taste is so basic anyway." They'd been planning to steal my life, my home, and my dignity. But the message that pushed me over the edge was from 3 days ago, right after Trevor's hair started falling out. "Don't worry about the hair thing," Rebecca had texted. "It's probably just stress. Once we're together officially, everything will be perfect." Even now, with his appearance falling apart, she was standing by him. But I had a feeling that loyalty wouldn't last long once she saw the full extent of what was happening to her precious Trevor. That evening I made my decision. It was time to end this charade. Trevor was in the living room, wearing a beanie pulled low over his head and scrolling through his phone frantically. Probably researching hair loss treatments or texting Rebecca about his crisis. "Trevor," I said calmly, walking into the room. "We need to talk." He looked up, his eyes nervous and distracted. "About what?" "I'm kind of dealing with a medical emergency here, Zara." I sat down across from him and pulled out my phone. "About Rebecca Stone." The color drained from Trevor's already pale face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. "I know about the affair," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "I know about the restaurants, the hotels, the jewelry you bought her. I know everything." Trevor's hands started shaking. "Zara, I don't know what you're talking about." "I found her hair in our shower," I interrupted. "The blonde hair that doesn't belong to either of us." That's when I started digging deeper. I showed him my phone screen, which displayed some of his text messages with Rebecca. His face went from pale to gray as he read his own words. "I can explain," he said weakly, but we both knew there was no explanation that could justify what he'd done. "Actually, you can't," I said, standing up. "There's no excuse for betraying your wife, for bringing another woman into our home, for planning to steal everything from me while I trusted you completely." Trevor pulled off his beanie, revealing the full disaster of his patchy, almost bald head. "Look at me, Zara. I'm falling apart. I need you right now." The sight of his ruined hair should have made me feel sorry for him, but instead, it filled me with cold satisfaction. "You need me now? That's funny because according to your messages, I'm just a clueless, dependent wife who can't survive without you." His eyes widened as he realized I'd read everything. "Those messages. I didn't mean that. I was just trying to keep her calm about our relationship." "Our relationship?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What relationship, Trevor? The one where you lie to me every single day? The one where you plan to divorce me and take everything while sleeping with someone else?" I walked to the window and looked out at our perfect suburban street, thinking about how everything had looked so normal just a week ago. Now I knew it had all been an illusion. "I want a divorce," I said without turning around. "Zara, please." Trevor stood up and walked toward me. "I made a mistake, but we can work through this. I'll end things with Rebecca. We can go to counseling." I turned to face him, taking in his desperate expression and his ridiculous appearance with his patchy hair and red, irritated scalp. "End things with Rebecca?" I repeated. "You mean the woman you've been planning your future with? The woman you bought jewelry for with our money? The woman who's been in our house, in our shower, in our bed?" Trevor reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again." "But I love you," he said, his voice cracking. "No, you don't," I replied calmly. "You love the idea of having someone at home who takes care of you while you do whatever you want. You love having a backup plan while you explore other options. But you don't love me." I picked up my purse and car keys from the coffee table. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I'll have a lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings." "Where are you going to get money for a lawyer?" Trevor asked, his panic making him cruel. "You can't afford to leave me, Zara. You need me." I smiled for the first time in days and it felt genuine. "Trevor, you really don't know me at all, do you?" I walked toward the door, then turned back to look at him one last time. He stood there in our living room, practically bald, desperate, and pathetic. "Oh, and Trevor?" I said sweetly. "You might want to switch shampoos. That one doesn't seem to be working very well for you." The look of confusion on his face told me he still hadn't figured out what had really happened to his hair. But he would soon. The hotel room felt like freedom. For the first time in days, I could breathe without the weight of pretending everything was normal. I sat on the king-size bed with my laptop, surrounded by printed emails, bank statements, and evidence of Trevor's affair. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from Trevor, but I ignored them all. I had more important things to do. It was time to destroy the narrative that I was just a helpless wife who couldn't survive without her cheating husband. I opened my laptop and began crafting what would become the most important social media post of my life. As a marketing consultant, I knew exactly how to make content go viral, and this story had all the elements people loved: betrayal, revenge, and justice. I chose a photo of myself from our last anniversary dinner, the one where Trevor had given me a beautiful necklace while secretly planning his affair. I looked happy and trusting in the picture, which was perfect for what I was about to reveal. Then I wrote my post. 3 days ago, I found a blonde hair in my shower. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my husband's. So I did what any good wife would do. I investigated. What I found was months of lies, hotel receipts, and plans to divorce me and take everything while continuing his affair with a local news anchor. But here's what my cheating husband didn't know about his clueless, dependent wife. I'm smarter than he ever gave me credit for. I replaced his expensive shampoo with hair removal cream, and now his perfect image is gone just like our marriage. Sometimes karma needs a little help. Hashtag done being naive, hashtag revenge served, hashtag not the victim. I attached several screenshots of Trevor's text messages with phone numbers blocked out, and one particularly damning email where he called me too stupid to ever catch on. Before I could second-guess myself, I posted it to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Then I sent it to my personal group chats with friends, my professional networks, and even my family group message. The response was immediate and explosive. Within an hour, my post had been shared hundreds of times. Friends were commenting with shock, support, and praise for my clever revenge. Strangers were sharing their own cheating husband stories and calling me a hero. But the real fireworks started when someone figured out that local news anchor meant Rebecca Stone. I watched in real time as internet detectives connected the dots. Someone found Rebecca's social media and noticed she'd been posting pictures at the same restaurants mentioned in Trevor's credit card statements. Another person found a photo of them together at a charity event from 2 months ago. By evening, Rebecca's Instagram comments were flooded with people calling her out for breaking up a marriage. Her professional Facebook page was getting negative reviews. Someone even created a hashtag Rebecca the Homewrecker. My phone rang constantly with calls from friends, family, and even reporters who wanted to hear more of the story. I ignored the reporters but talked to my closest friends, who were amazed by what I'd done. "Girl, you are brilliant," my best friend Monica said over FaceTime. "I cannot believe you outsmarted him like that." And his hair really fell out. "Almost all of it," I confirmed, feeling satisfied all over again. "He looks ridiculous." "What's he saying about all this?" she asked. I showed her my phone, which had 47 missed calls from Trevor and dozens of increasingly desperate text messages. "Zara, what did you do? Take down that post right now. My phone won't stop ringing. People are calling my office. This is insane. We need to talk." "He's panicking," I told Monica. "Good." But the best part came around 9 p.m. when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Is this Zara Thompson?" The voice was female, shaky, and familiar. "Who is this?" "This is Rebecca Stone. I think we need to talk." I almost laughed out loud. "Oh, do we? That's interesting, Rebecca, because I don't recall you wanting to talk when you were sleeping with my husband." "Look, I didn't know the whole story," she said quickly. "Trevor told me you two were already separated. He said you were getting divorced. And you believed that while he was still wearing his wedding ring and living in our house?" Silence on the other end. "I'm getting death threats because of your post," she finally said. "People are calling my work, my family. This has gone too far." "Has it?" I asked coldly. "Because from where I'm sitting, this is exactly what you both deserve. You wanted to destroy my life and take everything from me. Now you know how it feels." "I never meant for any of this to happen," Rebecca said, starting to cry. "You meant for it to happen to me," I replied. "You just didn't expect to face any consequences for your actions." I hung up on her and immediately blocked her number. I felt no sympathy for her tears or her panic. She'd made her choices and now she could live with them. My post continued to spread throughout the night. By morning, it had been shared over 10,000 times and picked up by several online news outlets. The story was going viral, and Trevor's reputation was being destroyed in real time. He'd called me naive and dependent, but I'd just proven that I was neither. I was strategic, patient, and perfectly capable of fighting my own battles. The war was far from over, but I'd won the first major victory. And I was just getting started. Monday morning brought a new kind of chaos. I woke up in my hotel room to find my viral post had been featured on 3 major news websites and shared over 50,000 times. My phone had hundreds of notifications, interview requests, and messages of support from complete strangers. But I also had a call from someone I'd been waiting to hear from. Jennifer Walsh, the divorce attorney I'd researched and contacted over the weekend. "Mrs. Thompson," she said when I answered, "I've been following your story online. I think we need to meet as soon as possible." Jennifer's office was downtown, in a glass building that screamed success and competence. She was a sharp woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "First things first," she said as I sat down across from her desk. "What you did with the shampoo was brilliant revenge, but it could potentially be seen as assault or intentional harm in court. We need to be prepared for that." My stomach dropped. Could I get in trouble for it? It's unlikely Trevor will pursue criminal charges, Because it would mean admitting to the affair and explaining why you did it, Jennifer explained. But in the divorce proceedings he might try to use it against you. She leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. However, the evidence you've gathered about his infidelity and his plans to hide assets from you is going to be much more damaging to him than a hair removal prank will be to you. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything: bank statements, credit card records, emails, text messages, and photos. Jennifer was thorough and methodical, organizing evidence like a general preparing for war. This is one of the most well-documented cases of adultery I've ever seen, she said finally. Your husband was careless with his digital footprint. We can prove he spent marital funds on his affair, that he planned to hide assets from you, and that he was emotionally abusive in his communications about you. What does that mean for the divorce? I asked. Jennifer smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her. It means you're going to get everything you deserve, and Trevor is going to learn that underestimating his wife was the biggest mistake of his life. We filed the divorce papers that afternoon. Jennifer insisted on hand-delivering them to Trevor's office, knowing it would maximize his embarrassment. I waited in a coffee shop nearby, imagining his face when he realized I'd hired one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. My phone rang within 10 minutes. What have you done? Trevor screamed into the phone, loud enough that other customers in the coffee shop turned to look at me. I filed for divorce, I said calmly. I thought that was obvious. You can't afford Jennifer Walsh, he said, his voice shaking with rage. I control our finances. Actually, Trevor, you might want to check our joint account, I said sweetly. I moved my half of our savings to a separate account this morning. Turns out I'm not as financially helpless as you thought. The silence on the other end told me he was checking his phone, probably looking at our banking app right now. You can't do this, he said finally, his voice smaller now. I already did. And Trevor? You might want to call Rebecca and let her know that her relationship with a soon-to-be divorced man who's about to lose half his assets might not be as appealing as she thought. I hung up and ordered another coffee, feeling lighter than I had in months. But Trevor wasn't giving up without a fight. Over the next few days he tried every manipulation tactic he'd ever used on me. He sent flowers to the hotel with notes begging for forgiveness. He called my family members trying to get them to convince me to come home. He even showed up at the hotel lobby, wearing a ridiculous toupee that fooled no one. Zara, please, he said when I agreed to meet him in the hotel bar. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. I looked at him across the table, this man I'd loved for 5 years, now reduced to wearing fake hair and begging for my forgiveness. The toupee was slightly crooked, and I could see patches of irritated scalp around the edges where his real hair used to be. What about Rebecca? I asked. I ended it, he said quickly. It's over. It meant nothing. Really? Because according to your text messages from this morning, you told her this was all a temporary setback and that you'd be together once you handled the Zara situation. His face went white. You're still monitoring my phone? I'm monitoring everything, Trevor. That's what happens when you betray someone's trust completely. I pulled out a folder Jennifer had given me and slid it across the table. These are copies of all the evidence we'll be presenting in court. 18 months of financial records showing you spent over $30,000 of our money on your affair. Hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, expensive dinners, all while telling me we needed to be careful with spending. Trevor opened the folder with shaking hands, his face getting paler with each page he turned. You also might be interested to know that Rebecca's engagement to Dr. Martinez ended yesterday, I continued. Apparently, he didn't appreciate learning about her affair through social media. Funny how quickly people abandon you when your actions have consequences. You destroyed her life, Trevor said accusingly. I exposed the truth, I corrected. She destroyed her own life when she chose to sleep with a married man. Just like you destroyed our marriage when you chose to betray your wife. I stood up to leave but turned back one more time. Oh, and Trevor? Your lawyer called Jennifer's office today. Apparently, he's advising you to settle out of court because fighting this will cost you more money than you'll save. Smart man. As I walked away, I could hear Trevor calling my name, but I didn't look back. I was done looking back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and negotiations. True to his lawyer's advice, Trevor agreed to settle rather than face a public trial that would expose even more of his behavior. I got the house, half of all our assets, and alimony for 3 years. Trevor kept his 401k in his car, but he had to find a new place to live and explain to everyone why his marriage had ended so spectacularly. The best part was watching his professional reputation crumble. Several of his clients found new lawyers after my story went viral. His law firm quietly asked him to take a leave of absence until the scandal died down. And every time he appeared in public, people recognized him as that cheating husband with the hair removal story. Meanwhile, my own story was being featured in magazines and websites as an example of how to take control after betrayal. I was getting interview requests, speaking opportunities, and even a book deal offer. I'd gone from being the clueless, dependent wife to being a symbol of smart, strategic revenge. And I was just getting started on rebuilding my life. 3 months after my viral post, I was signing the lease on a beautiful downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. It was smaller than the suburban house I'd shared with Trevor, but it felt like a palace because it was entirely mine. My marketing consulting business had exploded after the divorce story went viral. Companies wanted to hire the woman who'd outsmarted her cheating husband and turned her pain into a strategic victory. I was booked solid for the next 6 months and had raised my rates by 50%. "This place is amazing," Monica said, helping me unpack boxes in my new living room. "You've really landed on your feet." "Better than that," I replied, hanging up a piece of art I'd bought for myself, something Trevor never would have approved of. "I've learned I'm stronger than I ever knew." My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, Trevor's apartment hunting in the suburbs. Apparently downtown rent prices were too high for his reduced circumstances. I smiled, feeling a warm satisfaction. Trevor had always prided himself on living in the best neighborhoods, driving the newest cars, and maintaining an image of success. Now he was learning what life looked like when you had to actually budget and live within your means. The social media attention had mostly died down, but I still got messages from women thanking me for showing them that they didn't have to accept betrayal quietly. Some shared their own stories of cheating partners, and others asked for advice on how to start over after divorce. I'd even started a blog called Not Your Victim, where I wrote about rebuilding after betrayal, taking control of your finances, and refusing to let someone else's poor choices define your life. It was getting thousands of readers every week. But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. I was having coffee with my new neighbor, Susan, when she mentioned something interesting. "You know, there's a woman at my yoga class who used to work at Channel 7 News," she said casually. "Rebecca something. She was let go a few months ago after some scandal." I tried to look only mildly interested. "Oh really?" Apparently she was having an affair with a married man, and when it all came out publicly, the station decided it was bad for their image. "She's been working at some small cable channel in the next state over. Much smaller salary, I heard." I sipped my coffee and nodded sympathetically, but inside I was celebrating. Rebecca had lost her fiancé, her job, and her reputation. She'd gambled everything on her relationship with Trevor, and when his money and status disappeared, so did her interest in him. According to Jennifer's sources, Trevor and Rebecca had broken up within weeks of the divorce being finalized. Apparently, a bald man living in a one-bedroom apartment wasn't quite the upgrade Rebecca had been hoping for. "The yoga instructor said she seemed really bitter about the whole thing," Susan continued. "Kept talking about how social media ruined her life." I said, pretending to think about it. "I suppose actions have consequences, don't they?" That evening, I was working on my blog when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I wondered if Trevor had found my address. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw a delivery person holding a large bouquet of flowers. The card read, "Congratulations on your new life. You deserve every happiness. A fan of your story." It was signed by someone I'd never heard of, probably one of the many women who'd reached out to me over the past few months. But it reminded me of how far I'd come from that morning when I'd found the blonde hair in my shower. I arranged the flowers in a vase and placed them on my kitchen counter, then stood back to admire my new space. Everything in this apartment was chosen by me, paid for by me, and reflected my taste and my personality. No compromises, no asking permission, no pretending to like things I didn't actually enjoy. My computer dinged with an email notification. It was from a women's conference in Chicago, asking if I'd be interested in giving a keynote speech about turning betrayal into empowerment. The fee they were offering was more than I used to make in 2 months. I accepted immediately. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked different than I had 6 months ago, more confident, more self-assured, more aware of my own strength. My eyes were brighter, my posture was straighter, and my smile was genuine in a way it hadn't been for years. Trevor had thought he was so clever, planning his escape from our marriage while keeping me as his safety net. He'd assumed I was too naive and dependent to survive without him. Instead, he'd freed me to discover exactly how capable I really was. And tomorrow, I was going to wake up in my beautiful apartment, work with clients who respected and valued me, and continue building a life that was entirely my own creation. It was the best revenge of all. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. My consulting business had grown so much that I'd hired 2 employees and was considering opening a second office. The book deal I'd signed was moving forward, with publishers excited about my story of strategic revenge and personal empowerment. But the most satisfying news came from an unexpected source, Trevor's own law firm. I was having lunch with Jennifer when she shared the latest update on my ex-husband's circumstances. "You're not going to believe this," she said, grinning over her salad. "Trevor's been let go from his firm." I nearly choked on my water. "What? Why?" "Apparently, several clients requested different attorneys after your story went viral. The firm tried to wait it out, hoping the attention would die down, but then Trevor made some poor decisions in court that cost clients money. The partners decided he was more liability than asset." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Trevor's career had been everything to him: his identity, his source of pride, his path to the lifestyle he craved. Without his prestigious law firm position, he was just another unemployed attorney in a city full of them. "What's he doing now?" I asked, curious despite myself. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. "He's advertising as a solo practitioner, working out of a small office above a sandwich shop. His website looks like it was designed in 2005. I looked at the crude website advertising, "Trevor Thompson Law Personal Service at affordable prices." The photo showed Trevor wearing an obvious toupee that didn't match his natural hair color, trying to smile confidently despite looking desperate and out of his depth. "And the best part," Jennifer continued, "is that Rebecca's new job is at a tiny cable access station in Kansas. She's doing the morning weather report for about a quarter of what she used to make." I shook my head in amazement. They really thought they could build their happiness on the destruction of my life, and instead they destroyed their own. "Karma's funny like that," Jennifer agreed. "How are you feeling about all this?" I considered the question seriously. Satisfied, I think. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because they're finally facing the consequences of their choices. For months, they were getting everything they wanted while I suffered in silence. Now the tables have turned. That evening, I was working late in my home office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it. "Hello, Zara." The voice was familiar and unwelcome. "Trevor." I kept my voice neutral. "How did you get this number?" "I need to talk to you," he said, and I could hear desperation in his voice. "Can we meet somewhere?" "We have nothing to talk about," I replied firmly. "Our divorce is final, and I've moved on with my life." "Please," he said, and I was shocked to hear him sound so broken. "Just coffee. One conversation." "I'm not doing well." Something in his tone made me curious despite myself. "What do you want, Trevor?" "I want to apologize. Really apologize. And I want to ask you something." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop downtown. I arrived first and chose a table near the window, wanting plenty of witnesses and easy escape routes. When Trevor walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd gained weight, his clothes looked cheap and ill-fitting, and his toupee was even worse in person than in his website photo. But most striking was his expression: defeated, ashamed, and genuinely remorseful. "Thank you for coming," he said as he sat down across from me. "You have 10 minutes, I told him. He nodded and took a deep breath. "I want you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you. Not just the cheating, but the way I talked about you, the way I planned to treat you in the divorce. I was cruel and selfish, and I'm sorry." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but he seemed genuinely broken. "What happened to you, Trevor?" I asked, not unkindly. "Everything fell apart," he said simply. "Rebecca left me as soon as the money dried up. The law firm let me go. Most of my friends stopped returning my calls. I'm living in a studio apartment and struggling to pay my bills." He looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. "I lost everything, Zara. And the worst part is, I know I deserved it." "Yes, you did," I agreed without sugarcoating it. "I know you have no reason to help me," he continued, "but I was wondering, could you maybe put in a word for me somewhere? You know people in the business community now. I'm a good lawyer when I'm not being an idiot about my personal life." I stared at him in amazement. "You want me to help you get a job? After everything you did to me?" "I know it's a lot to ask," he said quickly. But you're doing so well now and I'm drowning. I thought maybe you'd found it in your heart to forgive me. I leaned back in my chair, considering his request. The old me might have felt sorry for him, might have wanted to help out of kindness or guilt. But the new me understood something the old me hadn't. Forgiveness didn't mean rescuing someone from the consequences of their own actions. Trevor, I said finally, I do forgive you. I've moved on with my life, and I'm happier than I've ever been. I don't carry anger toward you anymore. His face lit up with hope. But, I continued, forgiving you doesn't mean I'm going to help rebuild the life you destroyed with your own choices. You made your decisions and now you get to live with them. Just like I had to live with the pain you caused me. The hope died in his eyes. So you won't help me? I won't hurt you, I said, standing up to leave. But I won't help you either. You're on your own now, Trevor. Just like you left me when you decided our marriage wasn't worth your loyalty. As I walked toward the door, he called after me. I really did love you, you know? I turned back to look at him one last time. No, Trevor. You loved the idea of having me as your safety net while you pursued what you really wanted. But you never actually loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have been capable of treating me the way you did. I left him sitting there alone, and I felt lighter with every step I took away from him. He'd wanted me to save him from the consequences of his actions, just like he'd always expected me to be there to clean up his messes and support his dreams while sacrificing my own. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who understood her own worth, who demanded respect, and who refused to be anyone's safety net ever again. And for the first time since I'd found that blonde hair in our shower, I felt truly, completely free. A year after my divorce, I was invited to speak at the Women's Empowerment Summit in New York City. As I stood backstage, listening to the crowd of over 2,000 women who'd gathered to hear stories of overcoming adversity, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. My book, Not Your Victim, A Woman's Guide to Strategic Revenge and Personal Empowerment, had just hit the bestseller list. My consulting business was thriving and I'd been featured on 3 major talk shows. More importantly, I'd helped dozens of women through my blog and speaking engagements to take control of their own situations after betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer called, please welcome Zara Thompson. The applause was thunderous as I walked onto the stage. I looked out at the sea of faces, women of all ages who'd come to hear how I'd turned my lowest moment into my greatest triumph. A year and a half ago, I began, I found a blonde hair in my shower that didn't belong to me or my husband. That single hair led me to discover that the man I'd loved and trusted for 5 years had been planning to destroy my life while I cooked his dinner and supported his dreams. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But what my cheating husband didn't know was that his naive, dependent wife had a secret weapon. She was smarter, more strategic, and more capable than he'd ever imagined. And she was about to prove it in the most spectacular way possible. I told the story of my revenge, my divorce, and my transformation, watching as the audience laughed, gasped, and cheered at all the right moments. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. How do you feel about your ex-husband now? She asked. Do you ever feel guilty about what happened to him? I considered the question carefully. I feel nothing about my ex-husband now, I said honestly. Not anger, not guilt, not satisfaction. He's simply irrelevant to my life. As for feeling guilty, I didn't make his choices for him. I simply refused to be destroyed by them. Another woman asked, what would you say to someone who's just discovered they're being cheated on? I'd say this, I replied, looking directly at her. You have 2 choices. You can be a victim of someone else's betrayal, or you can be the author of your own comeback story. The pain is the same either way, but only one path leads to power. After the event, I was signing books when a familiar name caught my attention. The woman approaching my table was someone I recognized from photos, though she looked very different now. Rebecca Stone, she said quietly, extending her hand. I looked up at Trevor's former mistress, noting how much she'd changed. Her hair was shorter and darker, her clothes were off the rack instead of designer, and she looked tired in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. Rebecca, I said neutrally, not taking her hand. This is unexpected. I know you probably don't want to see me, she said, glancing around nervously. But I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. I was young and stupid, she continued. I believed Trevor when he said you 2 were separated. I convinced myself that what we were doing wasn't really wrong because I wanted it to not be wrong. And now? I asked. Now I know better, she said sadly. I lost everything because of those choices. My job, my fiancé, my reputation. I'm working at a tiny station in the middle of nowhere, and everyone I meet eventually finds out about the scandal. She paused, looking down at her hands. But the worst part is knowing that I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did was wrong. I considered her words carefully. Rebecca, I appreciate you coming here to say this. It takes courage to face someone you've wronged. Her eyes filled with hope. But, I continued, your apology doesn't change what you did, and it doesn't erase the consequences you're living with. Just like Trevor, you made your choices and now you get to live with them. She nodded sadly. I understand. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of completion. Both Trevor and Rebecca had now apologized, had acknowledged their wrongdoing, and were living with the consequences of their actions. Justice had been served not through my planning, but through the natural result of their own poor choices. That evening, I was having dinner alone at a nice restaurant, celebrating another successful speaking engagement, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Thought you'd find this interesting, she wrote, followed by a link to a local news article. The headline read, Local Attorney Arrested for Fraud. The article described how Trevor had been caught overcharging clients and mishandling trust fund money in his desperate attempt to maintain his lifestyle. I read the article twice, feeling a mixture of shock and inevitability. Trevor's downward spiral had apparently continued even after our coffee shop meeting. His desperation had led him to cross legal and ethical lines that would likely end his career permanently. I put my phone away and returned to my dinner, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 18 months ago, I'd been a trusting wife who believed in fairy tale endings and the power of unconditional love. Now I was a successful businesswoman who understood that actions have consequences and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while others destroy themselves. My phone rang as I was finishing dessert. It was Monica. Did you see the news about Trevor? She asked excitedly. I did, I replied calmly. How are you feeling about it? I thought about her question as I watched the city lights twinkle outside the restaurant window. Honestly, I feel nothing. Trevor stopped being my problem the day I filed for divorce. What he does with his life now is between him and the legal system. You've really moved on, haven't you? Monica said, sounding impressed. Completely, I confirmed. And it feels amazing. As I walked back to my apartment that night, I reflected on how perfectly everything had worked out. Not because I'd planned it that way, but because I'd refused to be a victim and had instead chosen to take control of my own story. Trevor and Rebecca had both apologized, both faced consequences, and both learned that betrayal comes with a price. But more importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. The best revenge really was living well. And I was living very well indeed. 2 years after finding that fateful blonde hair in my shower, I was standing in my new office space, watching my team of 5 employees work on campaigns for some of the city's most prestigious clients. My company, Strategic Empowerment Consulting, had grown beyond my wildest dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me that Trevor's betrayal had been the catalyst for the most successful period of my life. My book had spent 12 weeks on the bestseller list and was being translated into 6 languages. I'd been invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing my story of transformation with thousands of women who were ready to stop being victims and start being victors. But the most satisfying part wasn't the professional success, it was the personal peace I'd found. Miss Thompson? My assistant knocked on my office door. Your 3 o'clock appointment is here. I looked up from my desk, where I'd been reviewing the final edits for my second book, Building Your Empire, From Betrayal to Boss. Send him in, please. The man who entered my office was tall, kind-eyed, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never needed to prove his worth by diminishing others. Dr. James Mitchell was a pediatric surgeon I'd met at a charity fundraiser 3 months earlier, and he'd been patiently asking me out ever since. Still working on convincing me to have dinner with you? I asked with a smile. Actually, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, I have a different proposition today. He pulled out 2 tickets and placed them on my desk. There's a medical conference in Paris next month. I thought maybe you'd like to come with me. Separate rooms, no pressure, just company. I picked up the tickets and examined them. James had never pushed, never assumed, never made demands. He'd simply been consistently kind, respectful, and genuinely interested in who I was as a person, not what I could do for him. Paris sounds lovely, I said, and watched his face light up with genuine happiness. Really? he asked as if he'd been expecting rejection. Really? I confirmed. But I have one condition. His expression became cautious. What's that? You have to let me pay for my own plane ticket and hotel room. I'm very particular about maintaining my independence. James laughed, a warm sound that filled my office. Deal. Though I have to warn you, I was hoping to take you to some very expensive restaurants. You'll have to let me pay for those. I suppose I can allow that, I said with mock seriousness. After James left, I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the city skyline. My life was full of possibilities now, full of choices that were entirely my own to make. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica. Emergency coffee meeting. I have news about Trevor. We met at our usual cafe, and Monica was practically vibrating with excitement. Okay, she said as soon as I sat down, you're never going to believe this. My cousin works at the county jail, and guess who's been sentenced to 2 years for fraud? I didn't need to guess. How long? 2 years with possibility of parole in 18 months. Apparently, he stole almost $200,000 from client trust funds to try to keep up his lifestyle. I sipped my latte and processed this information. That's actually kind of sad, I said finally. Monica stared at me. Sad? The man tried to destroy your life. I know, I replied. But look at me, Monica. I'm successful, happy, and about to go to Paris with a wonderful man who treats me like I deserve to be treated. Meanwhile, Trevor is in jail because he couldn't accept the consequences of his actions and kept making increasingly desperate choices. I shook my head. I'm not glad he's suffering. I'm just grateful that I'm not. Monica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know what? You're right. You've become this amazing, wise woman and he's in jail. That evening I was getting ready for bed when I found myself standing in my bathroom, looking at the spot where I'd once found that blonde hair that changed everything. I'd replaced all the fixtures since moving to my new apartment, but I could still remember the moment of discovery that had started my journey from victim to victor. My reflection looked back at me from the mirror confident, successful, and genuinely happy. I'd learned that I was capable of things I'd never imagined, that I was stronger than I'd known, and that the best revenge really was living well. I thought about Trevor in his jail cell, probably wondering how his life had gone so wrong. I thought about Rebecca in Kansas, working at a small television station and living with the consequences of her choices. And I thought about all the women who'd reached out to me over the past 2 years, telling me how my story had inspired them to take control of their own lives. My phone buzzed with a goodnight text from James. Sweet dreams. Can't wait for Paris. I smiled and typed back, sweet dreams to you too. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought me to this moment. Trevor's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been the push I needed to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to be who someone else wanted me to be. I'd learned to value myself, to demand respect, to build my own success, and to never again accept being someone's second choice or backup plan. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing that ever happened to you if you're brave enough to take control of your own story. The blonde hair in my shower had been meant to humiliate me, but instead it had liberated me. And as I drifted off to sleep in my beautiful apartment, thinking about Paris and new beginnings and the man who saw my strength as attractive rather than threatening, I knew that the best chapters of my life were still to come. Trevor had thought he was so clever, planning his escape from our marriage while keeping me as his safety net. He'd called me naive and dependent, never imagining that I had the strength and intelligence to not just survive his betrayal, but to thrive because of it. But the most satisfying part of my revenge hadn't been the hair removal cream or the viral social media post or watching his life fall apart. The most satisfying part was this moment, right now, when I could honestly say that I was grateful for everything that had happened. Because without his betrayal, I never would have discovered how truly powerful I could be. And that was the happiest ending of all.